So Wynn's described how the show began, and by September 2004, 5 years later, a lot had happened. The offices had been established here in Geneva. We had the initial staff, many of whom are still with us. We had the first full board meeting here in Geneva in March of 2000, and a year later, in May 2001, the first annual stakeholders meeting. We revised the business plan because we had a new board and they had some staff, and this was approved, the new business plan, in November 2003. We managed to get $107 million by July 2004, and of course further funding and additional stakeholders were being sought, and of course that situation remains and will always remain. 2 further calls for proposals were made, and we got nearly 300 proposals in total since MMV began over 5 years, and these were reviewed as usual by ESAC, resulting in a portfolio of 21 projects. And then the concept of the mini portfolio was developed. This, I'll now talk in a bit more detail about some of these things. As I say, we revised the business plan to reflect the fact that we had a proper board and we had some staff, and it was very important that the staff should be involved in the new business plan. And also in 2001, after considerable discussion, WHO proposed new treatment guidelines for falciparum malaria, and these key recommendations which we had to take on board were that we would continue with our ongoing priority focus on treatments for chloroquine, quin, and SP-resistant falciparum, and that product profiles in future for such treatments should be modified to encompass the need for fixed combinations of molecules of independent mode of action, at least 2 per new drug. Very important change in what we had to do. We were successful in fundraising, and on this slide it shows the initial funders, and I'm glad to say most of them are still with us and have continued to be strong and generous supporters of MMV, and a lot of that was discussed in the film that started us off today. We never cease to be grateful for this, and I hope that I'm pretty sure they're pretty pleased with what MMV has managed to do. Now, the Expert Scientific Advisory Committee, of course, is absolutely fundamental to our work, and it has always been composed of an international group of independent experts with a varied background in malaria drug discovery, development, and control mechanisms, and it comes from around the world, chaired by Simon Campbell, then by Wynn Guttridge. Its prime tasks are, as you would expect, conduct the annual review of all the projects in the portfolio and advise management on which projects to stop, always a very important decision, which to continue with restricted funding and which to fund fully, and also to carry out the initial triage of projects was submitted in response to a call of projects, and to look at those that were selected and make recommendations to which to add to the portfolio. And I won't describe everybody here, but I'd particularly like to point out Professor Thornchai here from Thailand, because he was very important for many years in developing antimalarials, and sadly he died 2 or 3 years ago. And he's been many of us have knew him for many years, and it was a very sad occasion. Now, the mini portfolio developed from MMV's drug discovery partnership with GSK, which is based their facility in Spain at Tres Cantos. And they were working at any one time on 2 or 3 discovery projects and incubating several more. And some of the staff there, about 50 of them, costs were paid for by MMV. So it was agreed that they should have flexibility between annual reviews to stop and start projects and to move resources around between projects, subject only to the agreement of a small steering committee of the 2 organizations. This was both cost-effective and increased the speed with which things happened. And since then, similar models have been extended to the collaborations, long-standing collaborations with Novartis in Singapore and Broad and Genzyme in Boston. I think this must have been one of the roots of the great success of MMV. And this slide that comes from Solomon Waka shows that the sun never sets on the MMV project portfolio, and it illustrates the fact that MMV really just manages what is in fact an enormous international collaboration across many aspects of the scientific and development world interested in developing new drugs. So it's really a collaboration, and I'm sure that is another route of its success. Now, of course, after a while, the people who funded MMV wanted to review us, and so a small group was set up. Fortunately, a whole lot of the funders came together and decided that they'd have a single review, because you could imagine how much time would be taken up if everybody reviewed separately. And a group of experts, Alan Fairlamb, Keith Bragman, Hassan Mashinda, and Addie Lucas got together and had a good look at what was going on. And they examined the structure and function of MMV, noting its vision and goals, its context of operation, and its achievements. And the main findings, which are quoted here, that MMV had made tremendous progress, clearly ahead of its predicted milestones towards achieving its goals, and that they thought there was reason for cautious optimism in expecting that within a few years that compounds in the current portfolio would successfully emerge as approved and licensed anti-malarial drugs. But they then went on to say that MMV must now address important downstream issues relating to the delivery of the expected products, and all these issues were taken on board. They made a further recommendation, this group of 4 men, that there were insufficient women on the board, and as there were 25% of the board that were female and not one woman on that review group, I took no notice whatever of that recommendation. You should practice what you preach, actually. So the mission of MMV was then expanded from discovery and development of anti-malarial medicines to regulatory approval, relying on the pharma partner to manufacture and distribute the newly registered product. And originally it was agreed by the then director of RBM, Rollback Malaria, David Nabarro, that delivery would be overseen by the RBM partnership, which would work closely with other WHO departments and pharma. But by 2005, it was becoming clear that this demarcation was not working. And so it was agreed that MMV would become a 3D organisation, discovery, development and delivery, continuing work post-registration with its existing pharma partners and with new additional partners as outlined there. And an executive vice president of Access, George Jago, who you saw in that film, was appointed and is now developing access plans for MMV patent products as they near regulatory approval. But of course, the third D is proving to be the most challenging. We always knew this, and I appreciate Chris Henschel's noting and discovering this excellent cartoon. So to finalise then, what's happened here? I've done something wrong. Would somebody come and rescue me to put on the thing again? Sorry. That's okay. Right. So some personal reflections, and this really addresses the 4 issues that people thought would make MMV fail. First of all, would there be enough ideas in the global academic community on which to develop new anti-malarial medicines? Well, of course, as is now very clear, that was not a problem. And despite the concerns of many in the public sector to the contrary, the pharmaceutical industry has thus far fully delivered on its promises of partnership. It always seemed to be nuts to expect the pharmaceutical industry to take the full burden of developing these kinds of products. And indeed, the public sector and the private charities had responded to this by maintaining, and where possible, even expanding their funding. But of course, as always in any organisation, the jewel in the crown is the staff, who've used the resources provided to bridge the gap between academia and industry to facilitate this concerted international effort towards the discovery and development of new treatments for malaria. And that's why it was such a privilege to be part of MMV.